Hey there, welcome back to another night of Reddit revenge stories while we explore this peaceful Minecraft world. I hope the gentle building helps you unwind after a long day. Now, before we begin, just a quick shout out to the people who have been showing up actively to comment and support this channel. Thank you so much. It helps me more than you guys think. Tonight's collection features everything from spouses hiding shocking secrets to co-workers undermining careers and even family members stealing treasured possessions. So settle in as we explore some wild stories of deception and eventual karma. Our first tale comes from someone who discovered their wife had been telling friends a horrifying lie to cover up something much worse. I never thought I'd be the guy posting one of these stories, but I'm still trying to process everything that happened. My wife and I had been married for 5 years, and I honestly thought we were happy. We had our arguments like any couple, but nothing major, or so I believed. It all started when I borrowed my wife's phone to order takeout one night when mine was dead. She was in the shower and a message notification popped up from her friend Jessica. "He's such a controlling asshole. You deserve better." I froze, completely confused. I know some people would have just ignored it, but my stomach dropped, and I had to know if they were talking about me. I opened the message thread and started reading. What I found was absolutely devastating. My wife had been telling her friends that I was emotionally abusive, that I controlled what she wore, monitored her spending, isolated her from friends, and even yelled at her regularly. None of this was true, not a single word. I sat there reading message after message of these complete fabrications about our marriage, with her friends responding with sympathy and anger toward me. I felt sick. Was I somehow abusive without realizing it? Had I been gaslighting myself? I actually started questioning my own behavior, wondering if I had somehow been hurting her without understanding it. I spent the next few days analyzing every interaction we'd had, wondering where I went wrong, even apologizing for being distant recently. But something didn't add up. While I was soul searching, I noticed patterns in her behavior that I'd been overlooking. Suddenly, her girls' nights that had increased from monthly to weekly made me suspicious. She always came home late, sometimes smelling like cologne, which she'd explain away as Jessica's boyfriend was at the restaurant earlier. There were unexplained hotel charges on our shared credit card statement that she claimed were work lunches or spa days with the girls. I'm not proud of what I did next, but I needed to know the truth. I checked her location during her next girls' night and found she wasn't at the restaurant she mentioned. Instead, she was at a hotel across town. I drove there, heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode, and saw her car in the parking lot. I waited in my car for 3 hours until I saw her leave, with a guy I recognized as her coworker Mark. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow, not just the cheating, but the elaborate lie she'd constructed to make me the villain in her story. It was calculated and cruel in a way I couldn't comprehend. When I confronted her at home that night, I expected denial. Instead, she broke down immediately. "What was I supposed to tell them?" she sobbed. "That I was cheating on my husband. They'd judge me. This way they support me instead." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She admitted she'd been seeing Mark for nearly 8 months, and that painting me as abusive made her friends not only accept the affair, but actively encourage it. "You should leave him anyway," they'd tell her. "You deserve happiness after what he's put you through." But that wasn't even the worst part. What broke me completely was discovering that 3 of our mutual friends, people who had been to our home, who had looked me in the eye and smiled, had been actively helping her coordinate meetups with Mark. They would cover for her, create fake plans as alibis, even let them use their houses sometimes when the hotels were too expensive. And they did all this believing I was some monster who deserved to be cheated on. My entire social circle was contaminated by these lies. People who hugged me at gatherings were secretly despising me based on complete fiction. The isolation I felt was overwhelming. Suddenly, I understood why certain friends had become distant, why I'd stopped getting invited to some events. They all thought I was an abuser. I filed for divorce the following week. She begged me to reconsider, claiming she'd end things with Mark, that we could work it out. But how do you rebuild trust with someone capable of not just betraying you, but systematically destroying your reputation to justify their betrayal? During the divorce process, I compiled all the evidence, the text messages, the hotel receipts, the location data, and sent it to our closest mutual friends with a simple message. This is why our marriage ended. Not because I was abusive, but because she was unfaithful and lied to all of you about me. I guess I needed them to know the truth, even if it wouldn't change anything. But surprisingly, it did. Over the next few weeks, I received message after message from people apologizing. Some admitted they'd had doubts about her stories but didn't want to question someone claiming abuse. Others were completely shocked and felt horrible about how they'd treated me. Jessica, her closest friend, even called me crying, saying she felt used and manipulated. 2 months after our divorce was finalized, I received a handwritten letter from my ex-wife. She apologized for everything: the affair, the lies, the character assassination. She said therapy had helped her realize how destructive her behavior had been, not just to me but to actual abuse victims whose experiences she had essentially weaponized for her convenience. Too little, too late. It's been a year now. I've moved to a different city and started over. Trust doesn't come easily anymore, but I'm working on it. The hardest lesson I learned is that sometimes the person sleeping next to you is capable of more betrayal than you could ever imagine. Not just cheating, but systematically turning your community against you to avoid taking responsibility for their actions. If there's one thing I want people to take from my story, it's this: if someone is telling you their partner is abusive, take it seriously, but also know that false accusations happen, and they cause real damage. In trying to support victims, we sometimes forget that verification matters too. The most painful part of all this wasn't even the cheating. It was realizing that while I was defending my wife to others, advocating for her, and trying to make her happy, she was carefully constructing a fictional version of me that made everyone who knew us hate me. And for what? So she could feel better about betraying our vows. I deserved better, and honestly, so did all the friends she manipulated with her lies. I never thought I'd be sharing this story, but I need to process what happened, and maybe it'll help someone else recognize red flags I missed. My husband Jake and I were together for 8 years, married for 6. I thought we had a solid relationship built on trust and respect. I couldn't have been more wrong. It started when Jake got food poisoning from some questionable sushi. He was basically living in the bathroom, and I needed to order his prescription for anti-nausea meds. His phone was closer, so I grabbed it to use the pharmacy app we share. That's when a notification popped up from a group chat called The Brotherhood, with a message preview that made my stomach drop. Send more of Emily. Bro, the last ones were fire. Emily is my name. I've never been the type to snoop through my husband's phone, but something about that message set off alarm bells I couldn't ignore. I opened the chat and started scrolling. What I found made me physically sick. Hundreds, literally hundreds, of intimate photos I had sent Jake throughout our relationship. Photos I had taken just for him, private moments I thought were between us alone. But it wasn't just the photos, it was the comments. Jake and his friends discussing my body in the most degrading ways imaginable. Rating me, comparing me to other wives and girlfriends whose photos were also being shared. Making jokes about what they'd do to me if they had the chance. These were men who had sat at our dinner table, who had brought their partners to our wedding, who had hugged me at barbecues and birthday parties. I kept scrolling back, hoping to find this was a recent, horrible lapse in judgment. But the further back I went, the worse it got. The first shared photo was from 9 years ago, when we were just dating. 9 years of betrayal. This wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern, a hobby, a sport for him and his friends. I sat on our bathroom floor for hours, scrolling through years of violation, trying to make sense of it. How could the man who claimed to love me share the most intimate parts of me with his friends for entertainment? How could he look me in the eye every day, knowing what he was doing behind my back? When Jake finally emerged from the bathroom, still pale from his food poisoning, he found me sitting on our bed with his phone in my hand and tears streaming down my face. "What the hell is the Brotherhood?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. His face dropped, not with shame or regret, but with annoyance at being caught. "It's just guy stuff. You wouldn't understand." "Guy stuff? You've been sharing my naked photos with your friends for our entire relationship. Photos I took just for you. How is that just guy stuff?" And here's where it gets truly insane. He shrugged, actually shrugged. "All guys do this. It's normal. You're overreacting." I almost doubted myself for a second. Was this normal? Had I somehow missed the memo that intimate photos are apparently community property? Was I the one with unreasonable expectations of privacy? No, absolutely not. There was nothing normal about this. If all guys do this, I said, then I guess all your friends' wives and girlfriends would be interested to see what their partners have been sharing too. That wiped the dismissive look off his face real quick. You wouldn't. Why not? If it's so normal, they shouldn't mind, right? The next few hours were a blur of shouting, Jake cycling between downplaying what he'd done, blaming me for overreacting, and finally, when he realized I wasn't backing down, begging me not to tell anyone. He even tried to grab his phone from me, but I had already sent myself screenshots of the most damning conversations and photos. I spent that night at my sister's apartment trying to figure out what to do next. Part of me wanted to just walk away and try to forget it all happened. But another part, a stronger part, knew that wasn't an option. Not just for me, but for all the other women who were being violated without their knowledge. The next morning, I made a new email address and got to work. I reached out to the partners of everyone in the chat. 7 women in total. I didn't send them the actual photos. That would just perpetuate the violation. But I sent carefully selected screenshots of the text conversations that proved their partners were participating in this photo exchange. Then came the breaking point. Within 48 hours, the Brotherhood imploded spectacularly. 3 of the guys had been kicked out of their homes. One wife had already filed for divorce. Another, who was engaged, had called off the wedding. Jake was blowing up my phone, alternating between rage and desperate pleas, as his friends apparently blamed him for the destruction of their relationships. "You've ruined everything," he texted. "The guys will never forgive me." I could only respond with, "Good thing you have all those photos to remember them by." I met with a lawyer the following week to discuss my options for divorce and potential legal action. As it turns out, sharing intimate images without consent is illegal in our state, something Jake and his buddies apparently never considered. The lawyer also connected me with a support group for survivors of image-based sexual abuse, which is where I met Melissa and Tara, who were going through similar situations. Here's the weird twist I never expected. Melissa was actually the ex-girlfriend of one of the other guys in the chat, Paul. She had found out he was sharing her photos a year earlier, but when she confronted him, he convinced her she was overreacting. Sound familiar? She ended up staying with him for another 6 months, feeling crazy for being upset, until she finally left for unrelated reasons. When I told her what I'd discovered, it validated everything she had felt. She joined my lawsuit against the group. Tara's story was even more infuriating. She had been married to another member of the chat, and when she found out about the shared photos during their divorce proceedings, her concerns were dismissed by her lawyer as just boys being boys. Finding out there were others pursuing legal action gave her the courage to switch lawyers and fight back. The divorce was finalized 4 months later. Jake tried everything to convince me to drop the lawsuit, claiming it would ruin his career, begging me to consider all our history together, even having his mother call me to say I was being vindictive. But with each manipulation attempt, I became more certain I was doing the right thing. Last week, we reached a settlement in the case against Jake and 3 other members of the group. The others had managed to delete evidence before they could be included in the lawsuit. It wasn't a life-changing amount of money, but it was enough to cover therapy and help me restart my life. More importantly, it sent a message. This behavior has consequences. I still have days where I feel exposed, violated, and angry. I wonder how many other women are out there, unknowingly being shared and discussed in group chats by the men they trust. But I also feel stronger for having stood up not just for myself, but for Melissa, Tara, and all the other women who were betrayed by these men. If you're reading this and have shared intimate photos of your partner without their consent, know that it's not just guy stuff. It's a violation of trust, it's possibly illegal, and it reveals a fundamental lack of respect that should make your partner run for the hills. And if you're someone who has shared intimate photos with a partner, remember that you have every right to expect those photos to remain private, and you deserve a partner who respects that. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're as addicted to Reddit drama as I am. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. And if you've experienced anything like these stories, share your thoughts below. Now back to our roommate betrayal. I've always been a high performer at work, not trying to brag, but I'm known for being sharp, organized, and on top of my game. That's why it was so confusing when I suddenly started struggling to stay awake during afternoon meetings. At first, I thought maybe I was coming down with something or just not sleeping well. It started about 6 months ago. I'd be fine all morning, productive, focused, making valuable contributions. But after lunch, it was like someone had flipped a switch in my brain. I'd struggle to keep my eyes open, slur my words slightly, and sometimes completely lose my train of thought mid-sentence. It was humiliating, especially in front of clients or senior management. My boss started giving me concerned looks. Coworkers would joke about me partying too hard the night before. I stopped getting assigned to important afternoon presentations. I tried everything, going to bed earlier, cutting out alcohol completely, drinking more coffee, even seeing my doctor who found nothing wrong with me. The situation came to a head when I was passed over for a promotion I had been working toward for 2 years. My boss pulled me aside and said, "Look, you're brilliant in the mornings, but we need someone consistent throughout the day. Your performance issues in the afternoons are concerning." I was devastated. The promotion went to Melissa, a co-worker who had started 6 months after me and whose work, honestly, wasn't as good as mine. But she was consistently alert and present, which apparently mattered more than the quality of her output. What was strange was that Melissa had become unusually friendly with me over the past few months. She'd offer to grab me coffee, compliment my work, and always chat with me in the break room when I was preparing my lunch. I had actually started to think of her as a work friend, despite the competition for the promotion. After losing the promotion, I became obsessive about figuring out what was happening to me. I tracked everything: what I ate, when I drank water, how many hours I slept. The only consistent factor was that the drowsiness always hit about 30 minutes after lunch, and I always brought my lunch from home and ate at my desk or in the break room. That's when I started to wonder if something environmental in the office was affecting me. I did some research and found that certain medications like antihistamines can cause extreme drowsiness. But how would I be getting exposed to something like that? Then came the breaking point. During a major client presentation, I completely blanked mid-sentence and nearly fell asleep standing up. The client looked concerned and asked if I needed medical attention. I was mortified and my boss was furious. That night, I bought a small camera, disguised as a phone charger. The next day, I plugged it into an outlet in the break room, where it had a clear view of the refrigerator and counter area. I put my labeled lunch container in the fridge as usual and went about my morning work. At lunchtime, I retrieved my food but didn't eat it. Instead, I replaced it with an identical lunch I had kept at my desk. I still got drowsy that afternoon, confirming my suspicions that something was happening to my food. When I got home, I checked the camera footage. What I saw made my blood run cold. Melissa had waited until the break room was empty, taken my lunch container from the fridge, opened it and sprinkled some kind of powder into my food before carefully mixing it in. She was smiling the entire time, like she was playing some harmless prank. I felt sick to my stomach. This person who I thought was becoming a friend had been drugging me for months, sabotaging my career and making me think I was losing my mind. I watched the footage again and again, trying to process the betrayal and calculating how long this must have been going on. The next day, I set up the camera again and caught her doing the same thing. Now I had multiple videos of her tampering with my food. I took the evidence straight to HR, but they were initially skeptical. "Are you sure she's not just adding salt or something?" This is a serious accusation. I couldn't believe they were dismissing me. "Why would she wait until no one is around to add salt to my lunch?" I demanded. "And why would salt make me so drowsy I can barely function?" Still, they hesitated to act without more evidence, so I decided to take matters into my own hands. The next day, I put my lunch in the fridge as usual, waited for Melissa to tamper with it, then confronted her in front of several co-workers while she was in the act of sprinkling the powder. "What are you adding to my food, Melissa?" I asked loudly. She jumped like she'd been shocked, spilling the small container she was holding. "Oh, I was just adding some seasoning. Your food always smells so good." "Really? Can I see that seasoning?" I held out my hand. She clutched the container to her chest. "It's just a special blend I make. Family recipe." "Then you won't mind if I try some?" I stepped closer. That's when everything unraveled. She tried to put the container in her pocket, but I was faster. I grabbed it and immediately recognized it wasn't any kind of seasoning. It was pills that had been crushed into powder. What is this? I demanded, though I already knew. Her face went through a series of expressions: shock, guilt, then defiance. It's just Benadryl, she finally admitted. It's not like it would hurt you. By this point, we had an audience of shocked co-workers. Someone had called our boss and HR. The truth came tumbling out as Melissa tried to defend herself. She's always been the favorite, Melissa said bitterly. No matter how hard I work, everyone thinks she's better. I just needed her to mess up a few times so people could see she's not perfect. The HR director looked horrified. You've been drugging a co-worker to damage her professional reputation? It's just an over-the-counter allergy medication, Melissa insisted, as if that made it okay. I just wanted a fair shot at the promotion. I was so angry I was shaking. You've been doing this for months. You watched me suffer, question my health, my sanity, and you just kept doing it. Melissa was escorted out of the building that day. HR launched a full investigation, reviewing the camera footage I'd collected and interviewing other employees. They found she had been tampering with my food for at least 4 months, based on when my afternoon issues had first been noticed. The aftermath was surreal. Melissa was fired, of course. The company offered me the promotion she had received, along with a significant raise as a sort of unspoken apology. They also paid for therapy to help me deal with the workplace anxiety and trust issues that, unsurprisingly, developed after finding out a colleague had been drugging me. What still haunts me is how easily everyone had accepted that I was suddenly incompetent in the afternoons. Not one person had considered that something external might be happening. They all just assumed I had developed a problem or wasn't managing myself well. It's been 3 months since then. I'm doing well in my new role, and the therapy is helping, but I still bring a locking lunch bag to work, and I never leave my food or drinks unattended. I've installed security cameras in my home office too, just in case. The most disturbing part? When they cleaned out Melissa's desk, they found a journal where she had tracked her project, noting which days I seemed most affected, which meetings I had messed up, and how much of the antihistamine she was using. She had been increasing the dose gradually, documenting my deteriorating performance like some twisted science experiment. If there's any silver lining to this nightmare, it's that I've learned to trust my instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. And sometimes the people who seem the friendliest have the darkest intentions. If workplace sabotage shocked you, wait until you hear how this person discovered their mentor was systematically destroying their reputation. When I graduated design school, landing an apprenticeship with Marcus Reynolds felt like winning the lottery. He was a legend in the graphic design industry. His agency had won every major award, and his client list read like a who's who of Fortune 500 companies. Getting to learn directly under him was an opportunity thousands of design graduates would kill for. The first year was everything I'd hoped for. Marcus took me under his wing, teaching me things you'd never learn in school. He was tough but fair, pushing me to refine my skills beyond what I thought possible. My work improved dramatically, and Marcus never hesitated to tell me how impressed he was with my progress. You've got real talent, he'd say. You're going to go far in this industry. By the end of my second year, I was handling major client accounts and pulling long hours. My salary was well below industry standard, but I told myself the experience and mentorship were worth it. Marcus kept promising that bigger things were on the horizon. Just put in the time now, he'd say. It'll pay off soon. During my annual review at the 3-year mark, Marcus was effusive with praise. Your work is exceptional, he told me. Honestly, you're doing senior level design now. When I asked about advancement opportunities, he assured me they were coming. The senior designer position should open up within 6 months. You're my top candidate, just be patient. But a year later, I was still in the same position, with only a modest raise that barely kept pace with inflation. Meanwhile, I was handling a workload that should have commanded at least twice my salary. Something didn't add up. When a friend suggested I apply elsewhere to test the market, it seemed like a reasonable idea. With my portfolio and 3 years under Marcus Reynolds, I expected to at least get some interviews. I discreetly sent out applications to 5 top agencies in the city. The response was puzzling. 2 ghosted me completely. 3 rejected me with form letters despite my qualifications, matching their job postings perfectly. Something felt off, so I reached out to a college friend who now worked in HR at one of the agencies I'd applied to. Look, she said hesitantly over coffee, I shouldn't be telling you this, but you need to know. Your portfolio got you to the final round, but then someone called Marcus for a reference. And? I prompted, already feeling a knot forming in my stomach. He tanked you, hard. Said you require constant supervision, miss deadlines, and have issues with original thinking. Basically the opposite of your portfolio. I sat there stunned, unable to reconcile this with the glowing feedback Marcus had always given me. That makes no sense. He just told me last month I was doing senior level work. My friend winced. It gets worse. He implied you might have plagiarized some of your portfolio pieces. Said something like, I'd verify the originality of anything in that portfolio. I felt physically ill. My mentor, the person I'd trusted with my career development, had been systematically sabotaging my prospects while smiling to my face. But why? I applied to a few more places, and with my friend's help, we confirmed the same pattern. Marcus was giving glowing in-person reviews while secretly blackballing me to potential employers. And here's where it gets absurd. My friend's cousin worked at another design agency and helped us set up a sting operation. Her agency called Marcus about me while recording the call for quality assurance purposes. The recording was devastating. Marcus spent 5 minutes praising my talent before the interviewer asked if he would hire me again. His tone shifted completely. Between us professionals, no. There are issues with reliability. Nothing I can put my finger on exactly, but I've regretted keeping them this long. You can do better. This was a man who had just approved my performance review with superlatives. A man who had personally thanked me for saving a major client presentation the previous month. The disconnect was mind-boggling. I started digging deeper and discovered something that made my blood boil. Through industry connections and social media, I tracked down 7 former apprentices of Marcus. Every single one described the same pattern: exceptional praise internally, mysteriously stalled career advancement, and difficulties finding positions elsewhere despite strong portfolios. All had eventually left the industry or taken positions far below their skill level. Then came the breaking point. A recent hire at our agency, Devon, mentioned that Marcus had specifically recruited him with the promise of mentorship and a shockingly low salary. But Marcus Reynolds personally recruiting me is worth more than money, he said earnestly. He says I'll be handling major clients within 2 years. It was like hearing my own words from 3 years ago. That's when I realized this wasn't just about me. Marcus had built his entire business model around this scheme. He'd find talented young designers, tell them they were special, work them to the bone while underpaying them, and then sabotage their opportunities to leave. He got premium work at discount rates, all while maintaining his reputation as an industry mentor. I couldn't confront Marcus directly. Not yet. First, I needed more evidence. I spent the next month secretly recording our interactions, documenting the praise he lavished on my work. With my HR friend's help, I gathered more recordings of his calls to other agencies. I even found a trail of emails where he had proactively reached out to design directors at other agencies to warn them about me when he heard through the grapevine that I was looking. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. I didn't go to Marcus. I went to Devon and 3 other current apprentices. I showed them everything I'd gathered. Their reactions ranged from disbelief to rage. Devon had turned down a solid offer at another agency to work with Marcus. Together, we developed a plan. We consulted with an employment attorney who confirmed that Marcus's actions constituted defamation and tortious interference. We had enough evidence for a solid legal case. On a Monday morning, instead of our regular team meeting, the 4 of us walked into Marcus's office together. His face registered confusion, then concern as we laid out printouts of the evidence on his desk. "What is this supposed to be?" he asked, his legendary confidence faltering. "This," I said, pushing forward a document, "is our collective resignation, effective immediately. And this," I added, sliding over another document, "is notice of our intent to sue for defamation, tortious interference, and constructive dismissal." His face went from confused to pale in seconds. "You've misunderstood," he stammered. "Those calls, those were just—" "Save it," Devon cut in. "We have it all on record. Multiple incidents, multiple people." Marcus tried everything: threats, pleading, offers of promotions and raises. When nothing worked, he switched to damage control, offering a settlement if we would sign NDAs. We refused. The lawsuit made waves throughout the industry. Former apprentices came forward with similar stories spanning over 15 years. Marcus had systematically built his award-winning agency on the backs of talented young designers who never got credit and were prevented from advancing their careers. The legal battle was ugly, but we eventually reached a substantial settlement. More importantly, we cleared our professional reputations. Several of us used the settlement money to launch our own design collective, specifically built on transparent mentorship and fair compensation. Our new agency is small but growing. We've already poached 2 major clients from Marcus, whose reputation is in tatters. The best part? We recently hired 2 talented graduates at fair market rates with clear advancement paths. Real mentorship, not exploitation. I still struggle with the betrayal sometimes. This was someone I looked up to, someone I trusted with my professional development. The years I spent under him weren't wasted. I learned valuable skills, but they came at a cost I never agreed to pay. If there's a lesson here, it's to trust your instincts when something feels off. And remember that true mentors want to see you succeed, even if that success eventually takes you beyond them. That manipulation was calculated, but imagine discovering your own family member was undermining your identity as a mother to your children. I never thought I'd be writing something like this about my own sister. We grew up close, shared clothes, covered for each other when we broke curfew, the usual sister stuff. After I had my kids, Emma, 7, and Liam, 4, Diane seemed genuinely happy for me. She'd always wanted children but found out in her 20s that she couldn't have them naturally. It was devastating for her, but she seemed to find joy in being Auntie Di to my little ones. That's why she was my go-to babysitter. She lived just 15 minutes away, didn't charge me, though I always brought her favorite takeout as thanks, and the kids adored her. Or so I thought. About 6 months ago, I started noticing strange behavior from my children. Emma became secretive, often whispering with Liam when they thought I wasn't paying attention. She'd give me these long, studying looks like she was trying to solve a puzzle. Liam started pulling away when I'd try to hug him, which broke my heart because he'd always been my little cuddle bug. I chalked it up to normal developmental stages at first. Emma was getting older, starting to assert her independence. Maybe Liam was just copying his big sister. But then the question started. "Mommy, what does adopted mean?" Emma asked one night during dinner. I explained it simply that sometimes children live with parents who didn't give birth to them, but loved them just as much. She nodded thoughtfully and dropped the subject, but something about her expression bothered me. A week later, Liam refused to let me help him with his bath. When I insisted, he burst into tears and said, "Auntie Di says you're just pretending to be my mommy." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean, sweetie?" Between sobs, he explained that Aunt Diane had told him and Emma that they were adopted, that I wasn't their real mommy, and that she was just letting me take care of them until they were older. I was stunned. I assured Liam that I was absolutely his biological mother, that I had carried him in my tummy, and that Aunt Diane was confused. He seemed relieved but still uncertain. That night, I gently questioned Emma too, and what she revealed made my stomach turn. For months during their weekly visits, Diane had been feeding them an elaborate story. She told them that their real mother was a beautiful woman who had to give them up, but might come back for them someday. She'd even shown them pictures on her phone of this supposed biological mother, a stranger she'd found online whose features vaguely resembled my children's. And here's where it gets truly disturbing. She told them they had to keep it a secret from me because I would be very sad if I knew they had figured out I wasn't their real mother. She was deliberately driving a wedge between me and my children while positioning herself as the keeper of the truth. I was shaking with rage by the time I finished talking with Emma. I called Diane that night, trying to keep my voice steady, and asked her to come over the next day to talk about something important with the kids. I didn't let on what I knew. I wanted to see her face when I confronted her. When she arrived, I asked the kids to play in the backyard while the adults talked. As soon as they were out of earshot, I laid it all out. "The kids told me what you've been saying to them about me not being their real mother." Her face went through a series of expressions, surprise, then guilty recognition, then defiance. She didn't even deny it. "They deserve to know the truth about where they came from," she said, as if she were being noble. "What truth, Diane? I am their biological mother. You know that. You were at the hospital for both births." And that's when everything unraveled. She launched into a bizarre justification, saying that while I might have given birth to them, I wasn't nurturing them properly. She claimed she'd seen how they gravitated to her, how they truly connected with her in ways they didn't with me. They would be better off with me, she said with chilling conviction. You're always working, always stressed. I have so much love to give them, and no biological children to split my attention. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own sister had been methodically poisoning my children's minds against me because she wanted them for herself. She genuinely believed she deserved to be their mother more than I did. Get out of my house, I said quietly, struggling to maintain composure. You're not to contact me or my children ever again. She had the audacity to look offended. You're overreacting, she said. It was just a game. The kids knew I was kidding. But we both knew that was a lie. She had been calculating and deliberate, using her position of trust to manipulate impressionable children. As I showed her the door, she tried one last tactic. Tears. Please don't take them away from me, she sobbed. They're all I have. I closed the door on her face and leaned against it, my heart racing. I had always known Diane struggled with not being able to have children, but I never imagined she would go this far. The aftermath was difficult. The kids were confused and upset. I had to carefully explain that Aunt Diane had told them something that wasn't true because she was very sad about not having children of her own. I reassured them with baby photos, ultrasound images, and birth stories. I also got them into therapy immediately. The therapist explained that children are impressionable and that Diane had taken advantage of that to plant seeds of doubt. The damage wasn't permanent, but it would take time to rebuild the trust that had been fractured. Then came the breaking point. Our cousin Rachel called me out of the blue, having heard from my mother that something had happened between Diane and me. I need to tell you something, she said hesitantly. Something I should have told you years ago. It turns out Diane had done something similar with Rachel's son Tyler when he was young. While babysitting, she had told him that Rachel and her husband were actually his aunt and uncle, and that his real mum had died. Tyler had been confused and frightened for weeks before finally telling Rachel what Aunt Diane had said. Rachel had confronted Diane, who broke down and apologized profusely, blaming her grief over her infertility. Rachel had accepted the apology and, not wanting to cause family drama, kept it between them. She made sure Diane was never alone with Tyler again, but didn't warn the rest of the family. I thought it was a one-time breakdown, Rachel said apologetically. I never imagined she would do it again, especially with your kids. I'm so sorry I didn't say something sooner. Learning this made me realize that Diane's behavior wasn't just a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a pattern, a deeply disturbing one. She had been indulging this fantasy of stealing other women's children for years. I've since cut all contact with Diane. I had to explain to my bewildered parents why their daughters weren't speaking and why they could only see their grandchildren without Aunt Di present. It broke their hearts, but they understood the gravity of what she had done. It's been 4 months now. The kids are doing better. Therapy has helped, and the distance from Diane has allowed the confusion she planted to fade. Liam is back to being my cuddle bug, and Emma has stopped giving me those searching looks. We're healing. As for Diane, I heard through my mother that she's finally started therapy herself, confronting her unresolved grief about her infertility. Part of me hopes she gets the help she needs, but another part knows I can never trust her around my children again. Some betrayals cut too deep to ever fully heal. If there's anything I've learned from this nightmare, it's that sometimes the people who can hurt us most are the ones closest to us. I never imagined my own sister would try to steal my children's affection and trust through such calculated manipulation. It's a wound that may never fully heal, but at least now my eyes are open. Family betrayal is painful, but imagine your significant other's family plotting against you for financial gain. I met James 3 years ago at a friend's wedding. He was the best man, I was a bridesmaid, and we clicked instantly. Within 6 months, things got serious. He introduced me to his family, and his mother, Patricia, seemed to adore me. She would invite me over for just us girls lunches, ask about my family, and even started including me in holiday traditions. I thought I'd hit the jackpot with a great guy and an awesome future mother-in-law. That all changed about a year into our relationship. The shift was so sudden it gave me emotional whiplash. One weekend, Patricia was showing me old photo albums and telling me she was glad James had finally found the one. The next weekend, she was cold, critical, and clearly annoyed by my presence. At first, I thought maybe I'd done something to offend her, but I couldn't figure out what. I asked James about it, and he was just as confused. "Mum's always loved you," he insisted. "Maybe she's just going through something." But the coldness continued and soon escalated to passive-aggressive comments. "James has always been attracted to very basic girls," she'd say while looking me up and down. Or, "James was always so ambitious before. I wonder what changed." Each comment designed to create insecurity or plant doubts. I tried to shrug it off, but then weird things started happening when I visited their home. I'd trip over rugs that hadn't been there before. My coffee mug would be placed precariously close to the edge of tables. The step stool I was using to reach something in the kitchen collapsed under me, sending me crashing to the floor. After each incident, Patricia would rush in with a concerned look that never quite reached her eyes. "Oh dear, are you all right? You do seem rather accident-prone lately. Perhaps you should see a doctor. I'm worried about your stability." The gaslighting was subtle but relentless. She started accidentally showing up whenever James and I had planned dates. She'd call him with emergencies that always seemed to resolve themselves once our plans were ruined. She even started making comments to our friends about how concerned she was about my mental health and drinking problem, neither of which were actual issues. James defended me at first, but gradually began to show signs of stress. We started fighting more, usually after visits with his mother. I'd be upset about something Patricia said, and he'd accuse me of overreacting. Looking back, it's clear she was playing us against each other. Then came the incident that made everything click into place. I was at James's apartment one evening while he was picking up dinner. I needed a pen and opened his desk drawer, where I found a stack of insurance paperwork. Normally, I wouldn't snoop, but the amount caught my eye. A $2 million life insurance policy that had been taken out just 3 months earlier. The beneficiary? Patricia. I wasn't suspicious yet. Lots of people have life insurance. But why so much? And why now? I took photos of the documents with my phone, intending to ask him about it later. That same night, while James was in the shower, his phone lit up with a text from Patricia. "Did you talk to her about the cabin trip yet? Remember the trails I mentioned? Perfect spot for what we discussed." My blood ran cold. What trails? What had they discussed? I hated myself for it, but I opened his text chain with his mother. Scrolling back, I found James declining her invitation to a remote cabin several times, with Patricia insisting it would help clear his head about his relationship problems. And here's where it gets absurd. I started connecting dots I hadn't even realized were there. The sudden personality shift, the accidents, the attempts to isolate James from me and make him think I was unstable, the huge insurance policy. It all pointed to something sinister. I'm not naturally suspicious, but I needed to know more. I reached out to James's cousin Ellie, who had recently cut ties with Patricia after some family drama. Over coffee, I carefully brought up my concerns without making direct accusations. Ellie wasn't surprised. "Aunt Patricia has a gambling problem," she revealed. "She's been in deep with some loan sharks for about a year now. The family's been keeping it quiet. But she's desperate for money. A year ago, right when her attitude toward me changed. Right when she started trying to sabotage our relationship. Right when the accidents began. I was terrified to bring my suspicions to James. What if I was wrong? What if he thought I was the unstable one, just like his mother had been suggesting? But I couldn't stay silent. I chose my moment carefully, making sure we were in public, just in case, and that I had all my evidence organized. I showed him the insurance policy photos, the text messages, and told him about the conversation with Ellie. I laid out the pattern of accidents and Patricia's behavior change. James was stunned. At first, he tried to rationalize everything. His mum was just overprotective. The insurance was normal financial planning. The accidents were coincidences. But as I continued presenting evidence, his face went pale. "There's one more thing," I said hesitantly. "I think we should record some of our interactions with your mother. If I'm wrong, I'll apologize and we can move past this. But if I'm right," he agreed reluctantly. We both installed recording apps on our phones and waited for the next interaction with Patricia. We didn't have to wait long. That weekend, she invited us to dinner. Throughout the evening, she made her usual undermining comments, but nothing incriminating. As we were leaving, James pretended he'd forgotten his wallet and went back inside while I waited in the car. He left his phone recording on the kitchen counter, while he searched for his wallet. What it captured changed everything. Patricia was on the phone with someone. No, they're still together. I'm working on it. Yes, I know how much I owe you. The insurance is in place, I just need a little more time. If they break up from the stress, that's plan A. Plan B is the cabin trip. If he's devastated enough after losing her, he might do something reckless, or at least sign over some assets to help with his grief. Of course I love my son, but I need this money, and he'll recover eventually. James played the recording for me in the car, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold the phone. The implications were unmistakable. Patricia was trying to break us up through stress and manipulation, hoping either to separate James from my negative influence so he'd help her financially, or, more horrifyingly, hoping the breakup might push him towards self-harm, triggering the insurance payout. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. James drove straight to the police. The recording wasn't enough for criminal charges, but it was enough for a restraining order. We learned Patricia owed nearly $1.5 million to some very dangerous people, and she saw the insurance policy as her escape route. We moved across the country the following month. James entered therapy to deal with the betrayal and cut all contact with his mother. We later heard through family that Patricia had to sell her house and car to pay off part of her debts, and was last seen working at a gas station in a small town 3 states over. Sometimes I still have nightmares about what might have happened if I hadn't found that insurance paperwork. Would Patricia have escalated from accidents to something more direct? Would the constant stress and gaslighting have eventually broken us up, leaving James vulnerable to her manipulation? I'll never know, and I'm grateful for that. James and I got married last year in a small ceremony. No family except his cousin Ellie. We're expecting our first child in December. We've agreed his mother will never know about her grandchild. Some bridges once burned should stay that way. If there's a moral to this story, it's that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who claim to love you the most. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong, document everything, and remember that true love doesn't try to isolate or control you, no matter what justification they give. Money can corrupt family relationships, but wait until you hear how this person discovered their own parents had been hiding a life-changing secret about their identity. I always knew I was my parents' favorite. They never said it outright, but the evidence was pretty clear. I got a car for my 16th birthday, while my siblings got bus passes. My college was fully funded while my brother and sister took out loans, and somehow my curfew was always an hour later than theirs had been at my age. It was awkward and sometimes made family gatherings tense, but I figured my parents just connected with me more. I was wrong. So wrong. The truth came out during my junior year of college. I was home for spring break, looking for my dad's stapler in his home office to finish a paper. While digging through his desk drawer, I found a folder labeled rent receipts. Curiosity got the better of me. We didn't own any rental properties that I knew of. Inside were meticulous records of monthly payments from both my older siblings to my parents, dating back to when each of them turned 20. Both my brother Mark and sister Julia had lived at home during college to save money, just like I was doing now, but according to these records, they'd been paying $600 a month in rent. I'd never paid a dime, and my parents had never once mentioned rent to me. This didn't make sense. My family wasn't poor, but we weren't rich either. My dad was a high school teacher, and my mum worked part-time at a doctor's office. They'd always emphasized being financially responsible, yet they were giving me a completely free ride while charging my siblings? No wonder Julia barely spoke to me anymore. I decided to confront them that evening. I waited until dinner, then casually mentioned that I'd found the rent receipts while looking for the stapler. The silence that followed was deafening. My parents exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret. Panic mixed with resignation. "We need to talk," my dad finally said, putting down his fork. "There's something we should have told you a long time ago." What followed was a revelation that completely shattered my understanding of my family and my place in it. I wasn't their biological child. I had been adopted when I was 14 months old, after my biological parents, who had been close friends with my adoptive parents, died in a car accident. "Your biological father was extremely successful in real estate development," my mum explained, her voice trembling. "When they died, they left everything to you in a trust fund, with us as trustees until you turned 25. I sat there stunned, struggling to process this information. I'd been adopted, I had a trust fund. Then why had they been treating me differently all these years? If anything, shouldn't they have been more sensitive about making me feel like part of the family? So, what does this have to do with you charging Mark and Julia rent, but not me? I asked, still confused. My dad cleared his throat uncomfortably. The terms of the trust allow us to use the money for your care and education, but also for household expenses, since you're part of the family. We've been using some of those funds to help with our mortgage and bills. That's why we don't need rent from you. And that's when everything unraveled. They hadn't told my siblings about my adoption or the trust fund. Mark and Julia had grown up believing our parents were simply playing favorites, giving me financial advantages and special treatment, while making them pay their own way. No wonder there was so much resentment. Why didn't you tell any of us the truth? I demanded, anger rising in my chest. Do you have any idea what this has done to my relationship with Mark and Julia? They hate me because they think I'm spoiled. My parents looked genuinely remorseful, but their explanation made things worse, not better. We thought it would be easier this way, my mum said softly. We didn't want you to feel different or like you weren't really our child. And we were afraid if Mark and Julia knew about the trust, they might resent you even more. So instead you created a situation where they resent me anyway, but for completely different reasons. I was shouting now, years of confusion finally making sense. The cold shoulders, the snide comments, the way my siblings had drifted away from me as we got older. It wasn't normal growing apart, it was active resentment. But that wasn't even the worst part. As the conversation continued, I started asking more specific questions about the trust fund and my biological parents. Details emerged that made my blood boil. How much is actually in this trust? I asked. More uncomfortable glances between my parents. Currently about $1.2 million, my dad admitted reluctantly. And how much was there originally? A long pause. Just over $3 million. The math didn't add up. Even accounting for my education and household expenses, there was no way they'd legitimately spent almost $2 million on me. I'd attended public schools, lived in a modest home, and while I'd never lacked for necessities, I certainly hadn't lived a millionaire's lifestyle. Where did the rest of the money go? I demanded. The stammered explanations confirmed my suspicions. They had been using my trust fund as their personal piggy bank for years. The reason they could afford to remodel the house, buy new cars, and take vacations wasn't because they were great at saving. It was because they were spending my inheritance, all while making my siblings pay rent and take out student loans. I spent that night in a hotel, my mind reeling. The next day, I contacted the law firm listed on some of the trust documents I'd found in my dad's office. The lawyer I spoke with was horrified by what I described and immediately began the process of having my parents removed as trustees. Then I did something that terrified me. I called my siblings and asked to meet them. Both were suspicious, but agreed. Over coffee at a neutral location, I told them everything, showing them copies of the documents I'd found. Their reactions weren't what I expected. Instead of directing their anger at me, they were furious with our parents. All these years they had been manipulated just as much as I had, turned against me by a lie of omission. They made me believe you were spoiled and entitled, Julia said, tears in her eyes. I've been awful to you, and it was all based on a lie. Mark just sat silently for a long time before speaking. They used your money to pay for their lifestyle, while making me work 2 jobs to afford their rent. That's just evil. Things moved quickly after that. With the help of the law firm, I filed a lawsuit against my parents for breach of fiduciary duty and misappropriation of trust funds. A forensic accountant determined they had diverted almost $1.8 million over 20 years, spending it on home improvements, vacations, cars, and even their own retirement accounts, all while fostering resentment between their children. The court ordered my parents to repay everything they had misappropriated, which meant selling their house and emptying their retirement accounts. They now live in a small apartment and barely speak to any of us. I sometimes feel guilty about their circumstances, but then I remember how they systematically lied to all 3 of their children for decades, damaging our relationships with each other in the process. The silver lining in all this has been rebuilding my relationship with Mark and Julia. We've grown closer than we ever were as children, united by our shared experience of manipulation. I've insisted on using some of the recovered trust money to pay off their student loans, something our parents should have done years ago instead of pitting us against each other. I've also learned about my biological parents through old photos and letters stored with the trust documents. They seemed like incredible people who wanted the best for me. I wonder how differently things might have turned out if my adoptive parents had simply been honest from the beginning. The irony is that I wouldn't have cared about the money. If they had told me the truth and used the trust legitimately for all three of their children's benefit, I would have been completely fine with that. Instead, their deception cost them everything: their children's trust, their financial security, and any chance of maintaining our family. Sometimes the worst betrayals come from the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally, but I've also learned that it's possible to build something new from the ashes of those betrayals. My siblings and I have managed to find our way back to each other, and that's worth more than any trust fund. Finding out your identity was built on lies is traumatic, but imagine discovering your partner's entire commitment to you was a calculated facade. I was supposed to get married last Saturday. Instead, I'm sitting here with a glass of what would have been our wedding champagne, trying to make sense of the last 3 years of my life. I always thought stories like mine only happened in movies or to other people. Turns out betrayal doesn't discriminate. Mike and I met at a charity run 4 years ago. He was charming, successful, and seemed genuinely interested in everything I had to say. After our third date, I introduced him to my closest friend, Jen. We'd been inseparable since college, roommates for years, maids of honor at each other's future weddings, the whole package. She and Mike hit it off immediately, but I was thrilled rather than concerned. My boyfriend and best friend getting along? Jackpot. Fast forward a year, and Mike proposed during a surprise weekend getaway. I was ecstatic. Jen was the first person I called, sobbing happy tears into the phone. "I'm so happy for you," she gushed. "You deserve this." She immediately volunteered to help with wedding planning and naturally became my maid of honor. Looking back, her eagerness should have been my first red flag. For the next 2 years, wedding planning consumed my life. Venue visits, cake tastings, dress fittings. Jen was by my side for all of it. Sometimes Mike couldn't make it to appointments because of work, but Jen was always there picking up the slack. "You're so lucky," my other friends would say. "Your maid of honor is so involved." I agreed. I was lucky, or so I thought. 3 weeks before the wedding, I received an email from an anonymous account. The subject line read, "You need to know the truth before you say I do." I almost deleted it as spam, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a short message: "They've been laughing behind your back for years," followed by a link to a cloud storage folder. What I found inside shattered my world. Dozens of photos of Mike and Jen together. Not friendly hangouts, but intimate moments. Kissing in his car, holding hands across restaurant tables, entering hotel rooms. The timestamps revealed their affair had been going on since before Mike even proposed to me. Some photos were from weekends when he claimed to be on business trips, or when she said she was visiting her parents. I sat frozen at my computer for hours, scrolling through irrefutable proof that the two people I trusted most had been betraying me for almost our entire relationship. But that wasn't even the worst part. The folder also contained screenshots of text conversations between them, discussing their relationship and, most painfully, mocking my obliviousness. "She actually thinks I couldn't make the cake tasting because of a client meeting," Mike had texted. "Meanwhile, you were tasting me instead," Jen replied, followed by explicit details I still can't bring myself to repeat. They talked about continuing their relationship after the wedding. Mike joked about sneaking away during our honeymoon to call her. Jen complained about having to pretend to be happy for me during wedding events. They had a code system for arranging meetups. They'd been playing me for a fool, and I had never suspected a thing. I'm not normally a vindictive person, but something in me snapped that day. I didn't confront them immediately. Instead, I made copies of everything, saved it all in multiple locations, and began plotting. I pretended nothing was wrong, continuing with wedding preparations while silently gathering more evidence. I installed a recording app on my phone and accidentally left it in my car when I asked Mike to borrow it for an errand. I recovered hours of conversation between him and Jen, including detailed plans for a rendezvous the day after our wedding, while I would be packing for our honeymoon. "I can't wait until this wedding nonsense is over," Mike said on the recording. "It'll be easier once you're not around all the time for this maid of honor crap." Jen laughed. "The only reason I've stayed friends with her this long is because of you. Do you know how boring her wedding plans are?" If I have to hear about table settings one more time, and here's where it gets truly insane. They talked about how they'd eventually transition to being a public couple, maybe a year or two after Mike and I had our first child. She'll be too busy with the baby to notice anything, Mike said. And then I'll just say I fell out of love, marriages end all the time. They had literally planned out years of continued deception. They weren't just having an affair, they were orchestrating an elaborate long-term fraud of my life. The rehearsal dinner was 3 days later. Both our families were there, along with the wedding party and close friends, about 50 people total. I had arranged with the venue to have a projector set up for a special presentation that I told everyone was a surprise tribute to Mike. When dinner was winding down, I clinked my glass and stood up. Before we practice walking down the aisle tomorrow, I wanted to share some special memories of our relationship journey, I announced, my voice surprisingly steady. The lights dimmed and the first slide appeared, a picture of Mike and me at the charity run where we met. This is where our story began, I said. Then I clicked to the next slide, Mike and Jen kissing in his car, dated just 2 weeks after he and I started dating. A confused murmur rippled through the room. Mike lunged for the laptop controlling the presentation, but my brother, who I'd briefed just before, blocked him. This is our real story, I continued, advancing through slide after slide of damning evidence. A 3-year relationship built entirely on lies, an engagement that was never genuine, and a best friend who was never actually my friend. I played selected audio clips from the car recording. I showed the text messages where they mocked me. With each revelation, the room grew more stunned. Mike's face had drained of all color. Jen had fled the room in tears. Both sets of parents watched in horror as their children were exposed as the calculating, cruel people they truly were. The wedding is cancelled, I concluded. I've already contacted all vendors and the venue. To those who traveled to be here, I apologize for the inconvenience. There will be no refunds for your plane tickets, but I hear Bermuda's lovely this time of year, even without a wedding. The aftermath was chaos. Mike's parents approached me, his mother in tears, his father ashen-faced. We had no idea, his mother kept repeating. We're so sorry. My parents surrounded me protectively as Mike tried to explain that it wasn't what it looked like, despite the overwhelming evidence suggesting otherwise. I walked out with my head high, leaving Mike to deal with the fallout. I kept the engagement ring, a family heirloom that, as my lawyer later confirmed, became a gift once he proposed. I sold it and donated half the money to a charity supporting victims of psychological abuse. The other half funded a solo trip to Thailand that had been on my bucket list for years. 2 weeks later, I received a package from Mike's mother, a check reimbursing my parents for every penny they had contributed to the wedding, along with a handwritten letter apologizing for her son's behavior and assuring me she had cut him off financially until he became a man worthy of respect. As for Jen, she tried to paint herself as a victim, claiming Mike had manipulated her. That narrative fell apart when mutual friends revealed that she had pursued him aggressively from the start, volunteering to keep an eye on him whenever I was busy with work. She lost her job after calling in sick for 2 weeks following the rehearsal dinner, only to be spotted at a bar by her boss. It's been 6 months now. I'm in therapy, working through the trust issues that come from such a profound betrayal. I've reconnected with friends I had neglected while focusing on wedding planning. I'm even dating again, cautiously. Sometimes I wonder if I should have handled things differently, confronted them privately, walked away quietly, but then I remember those text messages, the calculated cruelty, the years of deception, and I know they deserved every second of public exposure. The strangest part, I'm actually happier now. Without the weight of their betrayal, a weight I didn't even know I was carrying, I feel lighter, more authentically myself. It turns out that losing a cheating fiancé and a fake best friend isn't really losing anything at all. That double betrayal was crushing, but prepare yourself for this workplace scheme where someone's entire career was built on stolen ideas. I used to believe that talent and hard work were enough to get ahead in the corporate world. Keep your head down, exceed expectations, and the rewards will follow. 5 years at Reynolds Marketing taught me otherwise. Turns out, in some workplaces, your biggest achievement might be padding someone else's resume, while yours collects dust. I joined Reynolds fresh out of grad school with stars in my eyes. The company had a solid reputation, and my boss, David Harrison, was considered something of a marketing genius. He'd won numerous industry awards and was constantly featured in marketing publications for his innovative approaches and boundary-pushing campaigns. I felt lucky to be working under someone with his reputation. From day one, David took a special interest in me. "I see potential in you," he'd say, assigning me to major accounts despite my junior status. I was flattered and worked insane hours to prove myself worthy of his mentorship. I developed comprehensive campaign strategies, create pitch decks, and design innovative approaches to client problems. David would review my work, offer minimal feedback, and then present it to clients or the executive team. At first, I thought this was normal. He was the director after all, and I was just a marketing coordinator. But as time passed and I began attending client meetings, I noticed something odd. David would present my ideas as if they were his own creative revelations. "I was thinking about this problem in the shower last night," he'd say, before outlining the exact strategy I had emailed him days earlier. Still, I brushed it off. That's corporate politics, right? Bosses always take some credit for their team's work. But then I started noticing my projects winning industry recognition, with David's name attached to them. The first time it happened was with the Meridian Hotels campaign, a project I had conceptualized and executed almost entirely on my own. I discovered it had won a prestigious industry award when a colleague congratulated me, only to immediately correct himself. "Oh wait, that was David's project, wasn't it?" I pulled up the award announcement online, and there it was. My campaign described in detail, attributed entirely to marketing visionary David Harrison. Not even a mention of the team behind it. That stung, but I told myself this was how you pay your dues in the industry. As the years passed, I moved up from coordinator to specialist to manager, but my advancement was oddly slow despite consistently stellar performance reviews. Colleagues who produced half my output were getting promoted faster. Every time I inquired about advancement opportunities, David would say, "You're almost ready, just need a bit more seasoning." Meanwhile, his reputation in the industry continued to soar, built on campaigns I had designed. Things might have continued this way indefinitely, if not for a technical glitch during a quarterly review meeting. David was presenting his latest successful campaign to the executive team when the company server briefly went down. He needed the files from his local drive, so he asked to use my laptop since I had backups of everything. As he navigated through my folders, he accidentally opened the wrong presentation file, the original version of the deck that still had my name on the cover slide and throughout the notes section. He quickly closed it, but not before I saw a flash of panic cross his face. That's when I started to suspect this wasn't just normal, corporate credit sharing. It was systematic theft. After the meeting, I went back and compared my original files with the versions David had presented. My name hadn't just been removed. The files had been scrubbed of all metadata, connecting them to me. In some cases, the creation date had been backdated to make it appear as if David had developed the concepts before our planning meetings had even occurred. But that wasn't even the worst part. With my suspicions now fully aroused, I dug deeper. I gained access to the company's shared drive, where presentations to the executive team were stored. There I found versions of my work spanning back years, all meticulously edited to remove any trace of my contribution. In one particularly egregious example, David had taken a strategic framework I'd developed for a client pitch and literally photoshopped out my name from a whiteboard visible in a concept development photo. Then came the breaking point. While searching for an old file, I stumbled upon a folder labeled Portfolio on the shared drive that David had apparently forgotten to restrict access to. Inside was a comprehensive collection of my work, campaigns, strategies, pitch decks, even notes, all rebranded as David's personal work product. He had assembled a portable portfolio of my intellectual property that he was using not just internally, but to build his personal brand in the industry. I also found emails between David and industry award committees where he submitted my work with detailed descriptions of his creative process in developing ideas that had never once crossed his mind. The level of deception was staggering. This wasn't opportunistic credit-taking. It was a calculated, years-long campaign to build his career by systematically stealing mine. I was furious, but knew a direct confrontation would be unwise. David had 5 years of seniority and relationships I couldn't match, so I began meticulously documenting everything. I recovered original files with metadata showing creation dates and authorship. I collected emails where I had sent David initial concepts that later appeared in his presentations. I even installed screen recording software and captured instances of him editing my name out of documents. Over 3 months, I built an ironclad case while continuing to smile in meetings and churn out work. The final piece came when I discovered David had submitted one of my campaigns for the industry's highest honor, the Marketer of the Year award. He had made the rookie mistake of forwarding the submission confirmation to his Gmail from his work email, probably to hide it from me. The IT guy, who had become a friend over the years, helped me recover this from the server logs. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming, least of all David. Rather than confronting him directly, I compiled all my evidence into a comprehensive document with a professional, matter-of-fact tone. No accusations or emotional language, just evidence presented chronologically with supporting documentation. I sent this package simultaneously to the CEO, the board of directors, and the HR director on a Sunday evening, requesting a confidential meeting first thing Monday. The response was swift. Security met David at the door Monday morning and escorted him to a conference room where the CEO, legal counsel, and HR director were waiting. I was called in an hour later. By then, David's face had lost all color. He tried to claim I was misrepresenting the collaborative nature of our work, but the evidence was overwhelming. We had no idea this was happening, the CEO told me privately afterward. The level of deception is shocking. David was terminated that day. The company's legal team worked with me to contact the various award committees and publications to correct the attributions. Most were horrified and immediately updated their records. As for the pending Marketer of the Year submission, the committee disqualified David and invited me to submit correctly attributed work instead. The company offered me a substantial promotion, a significant raise, and back pay calculated on what my salary progression should have been based on my actual contributions. They also assigned me David's corner office with a view of the river, a small but satisfying bit of justice. In the aftermath, 3 other team members came forward with similar stories of David taking credit for their work, though none as extensively as with me. It turned out he'd been running this scheme for nearly a decade across multiple companies. His entire reputation in the industry was built on stolen work. It's been a year since David's departure. I now lead the creative department, making sure every team member gets proper credit for their contributions. I still sometimes wonder how different my career trajectory might have been without those 5 lost years. But the experience taught me valuable lessons about protecting my work, documenting my contributions, and the importance of creating a culture where credit is given where it's due. As for David, last I heard he's working as a marketing consultant, though his client list is notably thin. It turns out a reputation built on theft doesn't survive scrutiny. Sometimes the house of cards collapses all at once, and all it takes is one person brave enough to pull out the bottom card. Career theft is devastating, but imagine the violation of discovering someone has been using your personal suffering for financial gain. I never thought I'd be telling this story to strangers, but it's been 8 months since everything happened, and I'm still processing my anger. Last year, I experienced what no expectant mother should ever go through, a late-term pregnancy loss at 32 weeks. My husband and I had already painted the nursery, chosen a name, and started planning our future as a family of 3. Then, in a matter of hours, everything changed. I won't go into the painful medical details, but it was traumatic both physically and emotionally. After it happened, I withdrew from social media completely. I couldn't bear to see baby announcements or gender reveals or first birthday parties. My husband and I told only close family members what had happened, including my parents, siblings, and a few cousins I was close with, including my cousin Rebecca. Rebecca and I had always been close growing up. We were only 3 months apart in age and had been bridesmaids in each other's weddings. When I told her about the loss, she was incredibly supportive. She sent flowers, checked in regularly with texts, and even drove across town to bring me meals during those first few weeks. I was grateful for her support during the darkest period of my life. About 4 months after my loss, I was slowly starting to rejoin the world. I still wasn't back on social media, but I was seeing friends in person again and had returned to work. That's when things got weird. A coworker approached me in the break room with a sympathetic look I'd come to dread. "Hey, I just wanted you to know that I donated to the fundraiser," she said, squeezing my arm. "If there's anything else you need, please let me know." I had no idea what she was talking about. "What fundraiser?" She looked confused. "The one for your medical expenses? Your cousin shared it in our neighborhood group. I had no idea you were still going through so much." A cold feeling spread through my chest. I asked her to show me this fundraiser, and what I saw made me physically ill. There on GoFundMe was a campaign titled, "Help Sarah Heal from Pregnancy Loss Complications." Except the Sarah in the photos wasn't me, it was Rebecca, and the story described in heartbreaking detail was mine, only she was claiming it had happened to her. She had taken every painful detail I had confided in her, the exact week of pregnancy, the medical emergency, even specific quotes about my feelings of grief, and presented them as her own experience. The campaign had raised over $15,000 from friends, extended family, and community members who believed they were helping her cover ongoing medical treatments and therapy following her loss. I felt violated in a way I can't even describe. This wasn't just about money. She had stolen the most painful, intimate experience of my life and was wearing it like a costume for attention and financial gain. She was receiving sympathy messages and support from people who had no idea she was lying, all while I had been suffering in private. I called my husband in tears and he rushed home from work. Together, we decided I should confront Rebecca privately before doing anything public. I called her and asked to meet for coffee, giving no indication that I knew what she had done. When we met the next day, I waited until our drinks arrived before placing my phone on the table, open to her fundraiser page. "I need you to explain this," I said quietly. The color drained from her face. For a moment, I thought she might actually apologize, might have some explanation that would make this slightly less awful. Instead, she went on the offensive. "I was going to tell you," she stammered. "I was going to give you some of the money. You've been so caught up in your grief that you haven't even noticed our family's struggles. Mark lost his job, we're behind on our mortgage, and nobody was helping us. So you decided to fake a pregnancy loss? My pregnancy loss? Nobody would have donated for financial problems," she hissed. "People only care when it's something dramatic. And it's not like you were using the story. You've been hiding from everyone." I was stunned by her justification. In her mind, my private grieving meant my trauma was up for grabs. The conversation quickly deteriorated from there. When she realized I wasn't backing down, she made a threat that still makes my blood boil. "If you tell anyone about this, I'll tell everyone you're having a mental breakdown from the grief," she said coldly. "Who do you think they'll believe? Me, who's been visible and functioning, or you, who's been a hermit for months? I'll say you're confused and trying to claim my trauma as yours because you can't process your own grief." And that's when everything unraveled. I stood up, looked her directly in the eye, and said, "You have 24 hours to take down that fundraiser, return every dollar, and tell everyone the truth. After that, I'm going to the police with evidence of fraud, and I'm telling every single family member exactly what you've done." She laughed in my face. "You have no proof. It's your word against mine." What Rebecca didn't know was that I had kept all of my medical records. I had text messages where she acknowledged my loss. I had emails. But most importantly, I had her on record now threatening me because I'd started recording our conversation on my phone as soon as I sat down. When I left the coffee shop, I didn't wait 24 hours. I went straight to the fundraising platform and reported the campaign for fraud, providing my medical records as evidence. I contacted everyone who had donated, explaining the situation and offering to connect them with the platform to get their money back. I filed a police report for fraud and identity theft, and I called a family meeting. Initially, some family members were reluctant to believe Rebecca could do something so cruel. She had always been the responsible one, while I had been struggling visibly with grief. She played into this, claiming I was having some kind of breakdown and trying to appropriate her experience because I couldn't handle my own grief. Then came the breaking point. The police investigation uncovered Rebecca's bank records, which showed that not a single dollar from the fundraiser had gone toward medical expenses. Instead, she had spent the money on a designer purse, a weekend trip to Vegas, and a down payment for a new car, all while claiming to be recovering from the exact trauma I was actually experiencing. Faced with this evidence, the family's support crumbled. Rebecca was charged with fraud and eventually took a plea deal that included restitution, community service, and probation. Several family members who had initially doubted me called to apologize, though some relationships remained strained. The most painful part wasn't the money or even the lies. It was the realization that someone I trusted had seen my deepest pain as an opportunity to exploit. While I was struggling to get out of bed each morning, she was crafting elaborate social media posts about her journey through loss, using words I had spoken through tears. It's been 8 months, and I'm still working through this betrayal with my therapist. The legal case is resolved, the money has been returned, but the violation lingers. I've learned that grief makes you vulnerable in ways you don't expect, and some people see that vulnerability as something to use rather than protect. If there's any silver lining, it's that this experience has shown me who my true supporters are. My husband, who stood by me without question, the friends who immediately believed me, and even some family members who, despite initial doubts, ultimately chose truth over comfort. I'm slowly rebuilding, both from my loss and from this betrayal. Some days are still hard, but I'm getting stronger, and I'm much more careful about who I share my pain with now. That exploitation of personal tragedy was horrific, but wait until you hear how this person discovered their mother-in-law had been systematically stealing their family history. I was always taught to be respectful of my in-laws, to compromise, and to pick my battles. My mother-in-law, Evelyn, tested those principles beyond what any reasonable person should endure. What started as missing earrings turned into a 5-year heist operation that nearly destroyed my marriage and family relationships. When I married Rob 8 years ago, I brought several pieces of family jewelry into our marriage. Nothing extraordinarily valuable in monetary terms, but priceless in sentimental value. My grandmother's pearl necklace she wore at her wedding, vintage earrings from my great aunt, my mother's tennis bracelet that she gifted me for my college graduation. I kept them in a jewelry box on my dresser, only wearing them for special occasions. About 3 years into our marriage, I noticed pieces occasionally going missing. At first, I assumed I was being absent-minded. Maybe I'd worn something and forgotten to put it back, or moved items during cleaning. The disappearances were spaced out enough that I didn't see a pattern, just occasional frustration when I couldn't find a particular piece I wanted to wear. My husband Rob was no help. "You probably just misplaced it," he'd say dismissively. "You've always been a bit disorganized with your things." I started to question my own memory, even wondering if I was losing my mind a little. Was I really that careless with treasured family heirlooms? The incidents continued, a pair of sapphire earrings from my aunt, then my mother's silver locket. I started keeping an inventory, noting when items went missing. A pattern emerged. Things disappeared after Evelyn visited. She lived about an hour away and would come for Sunday dinners or family celebrations. I mentioned this pattern to Rob, but he was horrified at the implication. "Are you seriously suggesting my mother is stealing from you? She doesn't need your jewelry. She has her own nice things." I backed down, not wanting to cause tension without concrete proof, but I started watching more carefully, noticing how Evelyn would often compliment my jewelry, asking to see pieces up close, commenting on craftsmanship or stones. She'd also find excuses to go upstairs where our bedroom was located, needing to use our bathroom instead of the downstairs one, wanting to see a recent renovation, or offering to put her coat on our bed during gatherings. Then came the breaking point. Last Christmas, my grandmother's pearl necklace, the most precious item in my collection, vanished after Evelyn's visit. The necklace had been worn by 4 generations of women in my family on their wedding days, including me. When I discovered it missing, I tore our bedroom apart looking for it, sobbing uncontrollably. Rob finally took my concerns seriously and promised to talk to his mother, though he was still skeptical. "Mum said she never touched your jewelry," he reported back. She seemed really hurt by the accusation. I decided enough was enough. Without telling Rob, I ordered small hidden cameras and installed them in our bedroom before our next family dinner. I positioned one with a clear view of my jewelry box, testing it multiple times to ensure it worked properly. I also took photos documenting exactly how my remaining jewelry was arranged. The next Sunday, Evelyn arrived for dinner with Rob's brother and his wife, Amy. During dessert, Evelyn excused herself to use the upstairs bathroom. She was gone for nearly 15 minutes, long enough that I almost went to check on her, but I restrained myself, knowing the camera was watching. After everyone left, I immediately checked the footage. There it was in high definition, Evelyn methodically going through my jewelry box, examining pieces, and slipping a pair of pearl drop earrings into her pocket. These weren't just any earrings, they were my great-grandmother's, meant to be passed down to my future daughter someday. I showed the video to Rob, whose face went completely ashen. "I don't understand," he kept repeating. "Why would she do this?" We confronted Evelyn together the next day, showing her the video footage. I expected denial, tears, maybe even a desperate apology. Instead, her response chilled me to the bone. "You don't deserve these pieces," she said with surprising calm. "You come from money. Your family has everything. My son should have married someone who appreciates what our family has to offer, not someone who looks down on us because we don't have fancy heirlooms or summer homes." And here's where it gets truly bizarre. Evelyn had been stealing my family heirlooms for years, not to sell or keep for herself, but to gift to Amy, her other daughter-in-law. She had been slightly altering the pieces, changing clasps, adding or removing stones, switching settings, and presenting them to Amy as Harrison family heirlooms, with elaborate fictional backstories about their significance. "Amy appreciates family history," Evelyn insisted. "She doesn't have her own family jewelry, and she's always wanted to be part of our traditions. She deserves these pieces more than you do." Rob and I were speechless. The level of calculation was staggering. This wasn't opportunistic theft. It was a deliberate, years-long campaign motivated by resentment and some twisted sense of redistributive justice. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. We demanded Evelyn return everything she had stolen, but she claimed many pieces had already been gifted to Amy. When we called Rob's brother to explain the situation, an even more disturbing detail emerged. Amy had no idea the jewelry was stolen. She had genuinely believed these were Harrison family pieces, with the sentimental value Evelyn had fabricated. The situation became even more twisted when we went to Evelyn's house to recover whatever items remained. In her bedroom, we found a journal where she had meticulously documented each theft, complete with photos of the original pieces, notes on alterations made, and the fictional histories she had created for Amy. She had entries describing her resentment toward me and my family, lamenting that her son had married above his station and how this was her way of evening the score. "Your mother actually kept records of her jewelry heist operation, like some kind of deranged Ocean's 11 character," I told Rob as we drove home. "The recovered items secured in my purse. I genuinely can't decide if that makes this better or worse." Recovering the already gifted pieces from Amy was heartbreaking. She had grown attached to what she believed were treasured family heirlooms, only to learn they were stolen from her sister-in-law. The revelation created a rift between her and Evelyn that may never heal. Amy was mortified, immediately returning everything and apologizing profusely, though none of it was her fault. Ultimately, I recovered about 2/3 of my missing pieces. Some had been altered beyond restoration, others had mysteriously disappeared when Evelyn realized she was caught. My grandmother's pearl necklace was eventually found hidden in Evelyn's attic, thankfully intact. As for my marriage, I gave Rob an ultimatum: either establish firm boundaries with his mother, or our relationship wouldn't survive. To his credit, he chose me. We went to counseling to work through the betrayal, and Rob limited contact with his mother to occasional supervised visits, always in public places where she has no access to our home. Evelyn still doesn't believe she did anything truly wrong. In her mind, she was simply redistributing heirlooms to a more deserving daughter-in-law. She's never offered a genuine apology, just excuses about how my privileged upbringing somehow justified her actions. The experience taught me that sometimes the people who smile to your face are cataloging what they can take from you. I now keep my remaining jewelry in a small safe, and I've had everything professionally appraised and photographed for insurance purposes. It's sad that it came to this, but family dynamics can hide dangerous undercurrents beneath seemingly calm waters. Family theft cuts deep, but imagine discovering your own brother was exploiting your father's health for financial gain. I grew up working in my family's construction business. My dad built it from the ground up over 40 years, starting with just himself and a pickup truck, eventually growing to a multi-million-dollar company that employs over 100 people in our state. I've always admired his work ethic and integrity. Everyone in the industry knows Richard Mitchell keeps his word and delivers quality work on time and on budget. That reputation is our company's most valuable asset. My older brother, Scott, joined the company right after college, while I finished my MBA before coming aboard 5 years ago. On paper, we were equals, both vice presidents with different areas of responsibility. Scott handled sales and business development while I managed operations and finance. But Scott always seemed to think he deserved more authority simply because he'd been there longer. Dad, at 68, was still very much in charge and showed no signs of slowing down. He was sharp as ever, regularly walking job sites, closing deals, and making the final call on major decisions. The three of us had occasional disagreements about company direction, but we generally worked well together. Or so I thought. The first hint that something was wrong came during our annual investor meeting last year. We have about a dozen private investors who've helped fund our expansion over the years. These people had known my father for decades, and they typically greeted him with backslaps and golf stories. But this time, several of them were treating him strangely, speaking slowly, avoiding complex topics, and exchanging concerned glances when he spoke. One investor, Harold, pulled me aside after Dad's presentation. "How's he really doing?" he asked in a hushed tone. "Scott's been keeping us updated, but it's hard to tell from the outside how fast it's progressing." "How fast what's progressing?" I asked, completely confused. Harold looked uncomfortable. "The cognitive issues? Scott mentioned your father's been having trouble remembering important details and making sound decisions. Said you all have been covering for him while preparing for a transition." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. My father had no cognitive issues whatsoever. Just that morning, he'd spent an hour discussing the intricate details of a complicated contract negotiation with our lawyers, catching things even they had missed. What the hell was Scott telling people? Instead of making a scene, I thanked Harold for his concern and promised to follow up. That evening, I called several other investors, posing innocent questions about the company's future. 3 more confirmed that Scott had told them our father was experiencing early-stage dementia and was being gradually transitioned out of decision-making roles. I was livid but decided to gather more information before confronting Scott. I scheduled lunch meetings with key investors over the next week, recording our conversations, legal in our state with one-party consent. The picture that emerged was infuriating. Scott had been systematically telling investors that our father was mentally declining, but that the family wanted to preserve his dignity by maintaining appearances. And here's where it gets truly despicable. Scott wasn't just undermining Dad's reputation. He was using this fabricated health crisis to position himself as the company's de facto leader. He'd been telling investors that he was making all the real decisions now, and that they should direct any serious business discussions to him. More alarmingly, he'd been soliciting side investments for his own projects, using the family name and company reputation as collateral. One investor showed me emails where Scott proposed a real estate venture completely separate from our construction business, implying it had our father's blessing and the company's backing. He'd secured nearly $2 million in commitments by trading on our father's reputation, while simultaneously undermining it. Then came the breaking point. At a dinner with our largest investor, I recorded him saying, "Scott mentioned your father sometimes doesn't recognize employees he's worked with for years. Must be heartbreaking to watch. That's why I'm glad Scott's taking control. We need continuity for the company's future." My father had never failed to recognize anyone. Ever. This was a complete fabrication designed to accelerate Scott's takeover plans. I spent a sleepless night deciding how to handle this. Confronting Scott directly might give him time to cover his tracks. Going to my father would devastate him but seem necessary. The next morning, I compiled all my evidence, recordings, emails, investment proposals, and requested an emergency meeting with our company's legal counsel and my father. Our lawyer was shocked. My father was initially disbelieving, then deeply hurt, and finally furious. We decided to call Scott into the meeting, without warning him about its purpose. I'll never forget the look on his face when he walked in and saw the evidence spread across the conference table. He went from confident to cornered in seconds. "What is this?" he demanded. "You know exactly what this is," my father said quietly. "Recordings of you telling our investors I have dementia. Emails soliciting money for your side projects while claiming I've endorsed them. An explanation, Scott. Now. Instead of apologizing, Scott went on the offensive. I was preparing them for the inevitable, he insisted. Dad, you're pushing 70. Transition planning is responsible business practice. Investors get nervous about succession. I was just reassuring them we have a plan. By claiming I'm mentally incompetent? My father asked incredulously. I may have exaggerated certain details, Scott admitted, but only to protect the company, and those side investments will ultimately benefit everyone. I was going to bring them under the company umbrella eventually. Our lawyer interrupted. Scott, what you've done potentially constitutes fraud, defamation, and breach of fiduciary duty. These aren't exaggerations. They're fabrications that could damage the company's reputation and financial standing. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. Rather than continuing to defend himself, Scott suddenly turned to my father and said, "This is exactly what I was worried about. You're letting emotions cloud your business judgment. Just like when you insisted on that money-losing hospital project last year, because your friend was the developer. The company needs objective leadership, not sentimentality." It was a breathtaking attempt to gaslight everyone in the room. The hospital project he referenced had actually been Scott's idea, and it had gone over budget precisely because he'd mismanaged it. My father stood up slowly. In a controlled voice that somehow made his anger more apparent, he said, "Scott, you're fired. Clean out your office. Security will escort you. Any company property in your possession must be returned by end of day." Scott looked stunned. "You can't fire me. I'm your son. I'm a shareholder." "I can and I have," Dad replied. "You remain a shareholder, but you're no longer an employee or officer of this company. The board will be convened to remove you as a director. We'll be conducting a full audit of your activities, and any misappropriated funds will need to be repaid." The aftermath was painful but necessary. Our audit revealed Scott had been diverting company resources to his personal projects for years, using our staff, equipment, and relationships while keeping the profits separate. He'd also been inflating his expense reports and taking kickbacks from certain vendors. All told, he'd siphoned nearly $800,000 from the company over 3 years. We've spent the past year repairing relationships with investors and clients who'd been misled by Scott. Most were understanding once we explained the situation, though some remained concerned about company stability. My father made a point of personally meeting with each major stakeholder to demonstrate his continued mental acuity and commitment to the business. The family side has been harder to repair. Scott refused to acknowledge wrongdoing, instead painting himself as the victim of our father's irrational attachment to control. He threatened a lawsuit, but backed down when our lawyer presented the mountain of evidence against him. He eventually agreed to a settlement where he retained his shares, but repaid the misappropriated funds and signed a non-compete agreement. Holiday gatherings are tense affairs now. My mother tries to maintain relationships with everyone, but the betrayal cut too deep for my father. They exchange stilted pleasantries at family events, but nothing more. I maintain minimal contact with Scott, mostly related to his shareholder status. The company has recovered financially, and we're actually performing better without the drain of Scott's side schemes. Dad and I have become closer through this ordeal, though I worry about the toll it's taken on him. He doesn't talk about it much, but I sometimes catch him looking at old family photos with an expression of profound sadness. The hardest lesson in all this has been learning that family bonds don't guarantee loyalty. Scott was willing to destroy our father's reputation and legacy for his own gain. It's a betrayal I understand intellectually, but still can't fully comprehend emotionally. How do you calculate the math on that? What number makes it worth destroying your own father's dignity? That family business betrayal was calculated, but wait until you hear how this person's manager directly attacked their financial security through systematic deception. I've been at Horizon Tech for 4 years now. When I started, I was thrilled to land a job at what seemed like the perfect company. Good benefits, reasonable hours, and a manager who appeared supportive. Marcus hired me personally and always had positive things to say about my work. "You're one of our top performers," he'd tell me during our one-on-ones. "I'm really impressed with how you've handled the Johnson account," or "that presentation you gave last week was exactly what we needed." With feedback like that, I expected my annual reviews to result in solid raises and potential promotions. But year after year, I received the minimum 1.5% cost of living adjustment. When I asked about the disconnect between his verbal praise and my compensation, Marcus would sigh sympathetically and blame budget constraints or company-wide salary freezes. He'd assure me that he was fighting for me behind the scenes, but his hands were tied by upper management. I wanted to believe him. After all, he seemed genuinely apologetic and continued to praise my work. So I kept my head down and worked even harder, hoping to become so valuable that the company would have no choice but to compensate me properly. Then Alicia joined our team. She was fresh out of college with minimal experience, hired for a position similar to mine. We got along well, and during a happy hour 3 months into her employment, salary came up. When she mentioned her starting figure, nearly 20% more than I was making after 4 years, I nearly choked on my beer. That can't be right, I said, trying to mask my shock. You're making more than I am. She looked genuinely confused, but Marcus said I'm starting at the standard rate for the position. That night I couldn't sleep. If Alicia's salary was the standard rate, why was mine so much lower? I started researching salary ranges for our position in our area and discovered I was significantly underpaid compared to market value. Something wasn't adding up. The next day, I requested a meeting with HR to discuss compensation benchmarking. The HR rep, Danielle, seemed uncomfortable but agreed to look into it. A week later, she called me in and gave me a vague response about performance-based compensation and how raises were determined by my annual performance reviews. Can I see my performance reviews? I asked. Your manager should have shared those with you, she replied, looking surprised. I explained that Marcus had only ever given me verbal feedback, never formal written reviews. Danielle frowned and said she'd look into it, as written documentation was company policy. What happened next was pure luck. A temp was filling in for Danielle the following week, and when I casually asked about the status of my request, she misunderstood and simply pulled up my file on her computer. Here's your performance history, she said, turning the screen toward me. Is this what you were looking for? I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Page after page of mediocre to poor performance reviews, completely contradicting the positive feedback Marcus had always given me verbally. Comments like, struggles to meet basic deadlines, requires excessive supervision, and limited growth potential filled the document. My overall ratings were consistently 2 out of 5, just enough to keep me employed, but nowhere near deserving of raises or promotions. I managed to take photos of the screen with my phone before the temp realized her mistake and quickly closed the file. I spent that night comparing the written reviews with emails and messages from Marcus praising the very same work he had criticized in my official records. But that wasn't even the worst part. Through a company chat group I was accidentally added to, I discovered a folder of management communications that included emails from Marcus to the director of our division. In these messages, he boasted about how he had been managing compensation expectations by giving positive verbal feedback while documenting poor performance. It saved the department over $175K in the last 2 years, he wrote proudly. They work harder trying to earn recognition while we keep costs low. And he wasn't just doing this to me. He had applied the same tactic to at least 4 other employees, all of whom genuinely believed they were valued team members, despite being underpaid and overlooked for advancement. I was furious. This wasn't just a misunderstanding or a manager playing favorites. This was a calculated system of manipulation designed to exploit employees while keeping department costs low. Marcus had been lying to my face for years while sabotaging my career and financial well-being. I considered going to HR, but given their previous reluctance to help, I worried they might be complicit, or at least aware of these tactics. Instead, I decided to go straight to the top. Our company founder, Elena, had always emphasized transparency and fairness in company communications. Though she was no longer involved in day-to-day operations, she remained chairman of the board and maintained an open-door policy. I requested a meeting through her assistant, compiled all my evidence, and prepared my case carefully. When the day came, I presented everything methodically. The contradictory verbal praise and written reviews, the market salary research, the damning emails where Marcus boasted about his deceptive practices, and testimonials from other affected team members who had agreed to share their experiences anonymously. Elena listened without interruption, her expression darkening as I progressed through my presentation. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. This is not the company I built, she finally said. This is not who we are. She promised to investigate personally and asked me not to discuss this with anyone else until she'd completed her review. True to her word, she spent the next week interviewing everyone in our department individually, and then everything unraveled. Marcus was terminated immediately. An independent audit revealed that his deceptive practices extended beyond performance reviews. He had been taking credit for department successes in his own performance reviews, while blaming failures on his team. He had also been manipulating project reports to make his leadership look more effective than it was. Elena called an all-hands meeting where she apologized for the breakdown in company values and outlined specific changes to prevent similar situations in the future. Transparent sharing of all performance reviews with employees, a new system where employees could provide feedback on their managers, and regular compensation benchmarking to ensure fair pay. Those of us who had been affected received substantial back pay calculated on what our salaries should have been based on performance and market rates. In my case, it amounted to over $42,000 for 4 years of suppressed wages. I was also promoted to senior level with appropriate compensation adjustment. Marcus tried to justify his actions in his exit interview, claiming he was just being a good steward of company resources and that he never meant to hurt anyone. He even had the audacity to suggest that he deserved credit for motivating employees effectively without monetary incentives. The HR director who shared this with me later said she had never seen such a stunning lack of remorse or self-awareness. It's been 8 months since then. Our department has a new manager who shares performance feedback transparently and advocates strongly for appropriate compensation. Morale has improved dramatically, and interestingly, so has productivity. Turns out people work better when they're fairly compensated and not being manipulated. The experience taught me never to accept a disconnect between verbal praise and tangible recognition. Words of affirmation mean nothing if they're not backed by appropriate compensation and advancement opportunities. I've also learned the importance of salary transparency among colleagues. If Alicia and I hadn't shared that information, I might still be working under Marcus's manipulative system. If you're reading this and something similar is happening to you, document everything. Keep records of positive feedback. Know your worth in the marketplace. And don't be afraid to go over someone's head when the situation calls for it. Sometimes the only way to combat systematic deception is to bring it to light at the highest level possible. Workplace deception can drain your bank account, but imagine discovering your spouse has been secretly making permanent reproductive decisions behind your back. My husband Mark and I had been married for 3 years when we decided it was time to start trying for a baby. We'd always talked about having children, at least 2, maybe 3. It was one of the things that drew me to him in the first place, his apparent enthusiasm for becoming a father someday. He'd talk about teaching our future kids to fish or build things in the garage, just like his dad had taught him. When we finally felt financially stable enough to start trying, I was beyond excited. I downloaded fertility tracking apps, started taking prenatal vitamins, and even joined online forums for women trying to conceive. Mark seemed supportive, never complaining about scheduled sex or my constant conversation about ovulation windows and basal body temperatures. After 6 months with no success, I started to worry. By the 1-year mark, I was becoming increasingly anxious. My doctor suggested we both get fertility testing done to see if there were any obvious issues. I immediately agreed and asked Mark to make an appointment for his tests. He kept putting it off, making excuses about work being too busy or not being able to find a doctor he felt comfortable with. I'm sure the problem is with me, I told him, trying to make it easier, but we should still check both of us to be thorough. He'd nod and promise to make an appointment, then conveniently forget again. I started to feel like I was nagging him, which made me back off even though his reluctance to get tested was frustrating. Then came the text message that changed everything. Mark had left his phone on the kitchen counter while showering, and it pinged with a notification. I'm not typically the snooping type, but the preview caught my eye. Dude, the bet's up to $2,300 now. Can't believe she still hasn't figured it out. Something about it made my stomach drop. I opened the message and scrolled up to see the conversation between Mark and his friend Tyler. What I read made me physically ill. Tyler: 1 year down, another $100 in the pot. You're the reigning champ, man. Mark: too easy. She's got no clue. Scheduled another trying session for tomorrow, lol. Tyler: cold-blooded, but she's going to catch on eventually. No one tries for this long without investigating. Mark: Maybe, but I've got the doctor excuse ready to go when needed. Might get another 6 months easy. I continued scrolling through their conversation history, feeling increasingly sick as I realized what they were talking about. Their messages referenced a bet about how long it would take me to discover Mark had a vasectomy he'd never told me about, a vasectomy he'd apparently gotten before we were even married. These men, including several mutual friends, had a running pool where they added money each month. I remained oblivious, laughing about my increasing desperation to conceive a child that was biologically impossible due to my husband's secret surgery. I sat on our kitchen floor, phone in hand, for what felt like hours. I couldn't cry, I couldn't scream, I was simply numb with shock. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was elaborate psychological torture. While I'd been anxiously tracking my cycles, cutting out alcohol, and blaming my body for failing us, my husband had been collecting money from a bet about my ignorance. When Mark got out of the shower, he found me still sitting on the kitchen floor with his phone. "What are you doing?" he asked, voice tight with barely concealed panic. "When did you get a vasectomy?" I asked flatly. His face drained of color. "I can explain." "Explain what? How you've been pretending to try for a baby when you knew it was impossible? Or explain the bet you have with your friends about how long you could keep me in the dark?" He stammered something about being afraid to tell me he didn't want children, about how he knew it would end our relationship, as if that somehow justified the elaborate deception he'd orchestrated. But that wasn't even the worst part. While he was still trying to explain himself, I used my own phone to search his email. There it was, a confirmation of his procedure from a clinic dated 2 years before we even got engaged. He'd had the vasectomy when we were just 6 months into dating, long before we'd ever had serious conversations about marriage or children. This meant our entire relationship was built on a fundamental lie. Every conversation we'd ever had about our future family, names we liked, whether we wanted boys or girls, how many children we might have, had been a calculated performance on his part. He'd been nodding and smiling and contributing to these conversations while knowing he'd made it physically impossible to have children. When I pointed this out, his justification somehow got worse. "I always knew I didn't want kids," he admitted, "but I also knew you did, and I didn't want to lose you. I figured once we were married for a while, you might change your mind, or I could convince you to adopt or something. So instead of being honest and letting me make an informed decision about my life, you tricked me," I was shouting now, "and then turned it into entertainment for your friends? The bet was just a stupid joke that went too far," he claimed, as if that was the main issue here. I didn't even bother packing much. I grabbed essential documents, some clothes, and my personal laptop, then went straight to my sister's house. Mark kept calling and texting, alternating between desperate apologies and attempts to justify his actions. I blocked his number. The next day, I contacted a divorce attorney. When I explained the situation, she was visibly shocked. Apparently, even in her 15 years of family law, she hadn't encountered this specific flavor of deception before. "This will absolutely factor into the divorce proceedings," she assured me. "Reproductive coercion through deception is taken very seriously by the courts." Word spread quickly among our friends. Most were horrified, especially the women. But what truly knocked me sideways was discovering that several of our close friends had known about Mark's vasectomy and the bet all along. Two couples reached out to apologize, claiming they'd felt uncomfortable with the situation, but didn't feel it was their place to tell me. "We thought he'd eventually come clean," one friend's wife told me tearfully. "We stopped hanging out with you guys because I couldn't look you in the eye anymore, knowing what he was doing to you. Some friend, some community I'd built my life around." The divorce was finalized in record time. Mark didn't contest anything once my lawyer mentioned we were prepared to submit evidence of the betting pool in court filings that would become public record. He agreed to a settlement that was more than fair to me, probably hoping to avoid having his deception made public. It's been 2 years now. I'm still in therapy, working through the trust issues this experience created. I've moved to a new city and made new friends. I'm dating again, cautiously. And yes, I've been upfront with potential partners about wanting children someday, and I demand the same honesty in return. The hardest part to reconcile isn't just the lie itself, but the cruelty of watching me suffer while turning my pain into entertainment. I spent a year blaming my body, researching fertility treatments, crying monthly when my period arrived, all while my husband and his friends were literally profiting from my distress. If there's anything I've learned from this experience, it's that compatibility on major life decisions like having children isn't something you can compromise on or hope will change over time. These are fundamental values that need to be aligned from the start, or at least honestly discussed, even if it means ending an otherwise good relationship. And if your partner seems to be stalling or avoiding important conversations or actions, pay attention to that hesitation. It might just be revealing something they don't have the courage to say out loud. That reproductive deception was horrifying, but our final story shows how far some exes will go to sabotage your reputation and safety. I never imagined I'd be sharing this story, but I'm hoping it might help someone recognize the warning signs I missed. 2 years ago, I ended a relationship with my boyfriend of 8 months, Alex. The breakup wasn't mutual. He wanted to continue despite some serious red flags I couldn't ignore anymore. His jealousy had escalated from occasional questions about male friends to checking my phone while I slept and surprise visits to my workplace to see if I was really there. When I finally ended things, he seemed to take it better than expected. He was upset but calm, saying he understood and just wanted me to be happy. I was relieved, thinking we might actually have a clean break without drama. Looking back, that sudden acceptance should have been my first warning sign. About 2 weeks after the breakup, I started getting strange text messages from unknown numbers, men asking when they could come over or if my rates were negotiable. I assumed they were wrong numbers and ignored them. Then the visitors started showing up at my door, at first just one or two a week, then increasing to multiple men daily at all hours. These weren't just random solicitors. These men knew my name, had my address, and were absolutely convinced I was an escort who had advertised specific services online. When I told them they had the wrong person, most were embarrassed and left quickly, but some became angry, insisting I had invited them and was now playing games. A few refused to leave until I threatened to call the police. I was terrified. I lived alone in an apartment complex where I'd always felt safe, but suddenly I was afraid to answer my door or walk to my car. I changed my phone number, thinking that would solve the problem, but the visitors continued. I changed my number again, same result. I went to the police, but the initial officer I spoke with wasn't particularly helpful. He suggested I be more careful about where I posted my information online and recommended I move if possible. It was infuriating. I was clearly being targeted, and his response was essentially to blame me. Thankfully, when I returned to the station a week later, after a particularly frightening incident, a man had tried to force his way into my apartment. I was connected with Detective Rivera, who took the situation seriously. She asked if I had any ex-partners who might want to harass me, and Alex immediately came to mind. Detective Rivera helped me track down some of the ads these men had seen. What we found made my stomach turn. Dozens of listings on various escort and adult service websites featured my photos, mostly innocent images taken from my private Instagram, but photoshopped to appear more suggestive, my actual address, and various phone numbers that forwarded to mine. And here's where it gets truly twisted. The ads specifically mentioned that I enjoyed role-playing reluctance and would pretend not to know why visitors were there as part of the fantasy. The person posting these ads had deliberately created a scenario where my genuine confusion and fear would be interpreted as part of a service I was supposedly offering. The police began tracking the source of the ads, but it was complicated. The posts were coming from different IP addresses, mostly public computers at libraries and internet cafes across the city. It appeared that whoever was doing this was methodically covering their tracks. Then came the breaking point. One night around 2 a.m., I was awakened by aggressive pounding on my door. When I didn't answer, the man outside started shouting that I had taken his money online and better provide the services, or he'd make me regret it. I called 911 in terror while he continued trying to break down my door. By the time police arrived, he had fled, but the incident was enough for the police to fast-track their investigation. Detective Rivera set up surveillance at several public computer locations, and within a week they caught Alex in the act of posting a new ad with my information. The evidence on his laptop was damning. He had a systematic schedule for creating new ads, templates for different websites, and even a spreadsheet tracking which ads generated the most traffic to my address. The police discovered he had been creating new listings almost daily for nearly 3 months. He had used over a dozen public computers around the city on a rotating basis to avoid detection. He had even set up email accounts in my name to communicate with potential clients and take deposits, which explained the man who claimed I'd taken his money. Alex was arrested for stalking, harassment, solicitation, identity theft, and reckless endangerment. During questioning, he admitted everything, telling investigators he wanted to teach me a lesson for breaking up with him. He seemed proud of his scheme, even telling Detective Rivera that he thought it was pretty clever how he had created ads that would make my denials seem like part of the service. The criminal case was straightforward with the evidence collected, but the aftermath was anything but simple. I had to move immediately. Even with Alex in custody, too many men had my address. I spent months working with various websites to remove the fake ads, many of which were on international platforms with little oversight or concern for my situation. Some required legal threats to take action. Others simply ignored me. I was granted a permanent restraining order against Alex, who ultimately took a plea deal, resulting in jail time followed by probation. The judge thankfully understood the severity of what he had done, noting that his actions could have easily resulted in me being seriously harmed or killed. Physically, I was safe, but psychologically, the damage was profound. For over a year, I jumped at every knock on my door. I changed my name on all social media accounts and made everything private. I moved twice more before finding a secure building, where I finally felt safe. I still use a P.O. box for all mail and never share my home address with anyone I haven't known for years. The hardest part to process was the calculated nature of what Alex had done. This wasn't a single act of anger or revenge. It was a methodical campaign designed to terrorize me daily while putting me in physical danger. He hadn't just tried to hurt me emotionally. He had created a situation where my physical safety was constantly at risk, where strange men felt entitled to access to my body and my home. 3 years later, I'm still in therapy, but finally rebuilding my sense of security. I've learned to trust my instincts about relationship red flags, knowing now that jealousy isn't passion, it's control. I've also learned the importance of documenting everything when something feels wrong. The detailed records I kept of visitors and messages were crucial in building the case against Alex. If you're reading this and recognizing similar patterns in your own relationship or in someone you care about, please take it seriously. Possessiveness and control only escalate, and the most dangerous time in an abusive relationship is often when you're trying to leave. Make a safety plan, involve trusted people, and document everything. And if you've already escaped but are experiencing harassment, don't let anyone dismiss your concerns. Persist until you find someone like Detective Rivera who will help protect you. And that brings us to the end of tonight's Reddit stories. I hope none of you ever experience betrayals this extreme, but if these accounts helped you recognize red flags in your own relationships, they've served their purpose. Remember that while these stories show the darkest sides of human behavior, they also demonstrate incredible resilience. Everyone featured tonight eventually found their way to safety and justice. Sweet dreams, everyone, and remember, sometimes the most important trust to maintain is the trust in your own instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. I'll be back tomorrow with more Reddit stories that will make your problem seem small by comparison.